Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. President Joe Biden has apologized to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky today for the holdup in wartime funding. He also announced a $225 million military aid package to help Ukraine in its defenses against Russia. Biden cited conservative Republicans who stalled funding a $61 billion military aid package for Ukraine for 6 months when he issued the apology. Meanwhile, at least 3 people were killed after a Ukraine strike hit a residential building that partially collapsed in the Russian-annexed Luhansk region, according to Russia's emergency ministry. The U.S. is by far Kiev's biggest supplier of wartime support, and Ukraine is trying to ward off an intense Russian aggression that spread to Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city. It comes as NATO, the U.S., and other allies, including France, said last week they would allow Ukraine to use their weapons on attacks on Russian soil, sparking threats of escalation and nuclear war from Russia. President Joe Biden's new executive order on border security, now in effect, has sparked protests. In Manhattan Thursday, thousands rallied against what they called a Trump-era asylum ban. Biden, escucha, estamos en la lucha. Immigrant rights activists held a news conference blasting the order as a step backwards and saying it violates international law and will leave thousands trapped inside the Mexican border or deported back to the place they fled. Christopher Martinez reports.
There's a new screening standard. The Biden administration will now let that screening happen within 4 hours. Not much time to find an immigration lawyer or to figure out how to argue your own asylum case.
This applies right now in the middle of a global displacement crisis, the worst we've seen since World War II, and will decimate asylum access for the foreseeable future.
Asadeh Irfani is a policy analyst with the National Immigrant Justice Center.
And even worse, the Biden administration is issuing this on the 85th anniversary of the United States turning away nearly 1,000 refugees fleeing Nazi Germany.
So now, the remaining avenue to seek asylum will be by making an appointment through a government-sponsored app on your smartphone that has Wi-Fi and biometrics, and not a Chinese Huawei phone, and the phone needs to be within a certain proximity to the U.S. border, and that gets you a chance to get an appointment for screening. Marisa Limon Garza is director of the Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center in El Paso, Texas.
Enforcing strict and punitive restrictions on who can seek protection and even shutting down the system is not a serious policy proposal. It's instead a cynical attempt to cater to the politics of racists and white supremacists. These policies are a threat to the most vulnerable.
Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martinez.
Convicted felon and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump attended a fundraiser in San Francisco last night hosted by tech billionaire David Sachs, who formally endorsed him, as dozens rallied nearby chanting, "Lock him up."
Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up!
Tickets are reportedly upwards of $300,000 for the gala. Ahead of his California stop, Trump returned to the campaign trail with a trip to the battleground state of Arizona, his first appearance since he was convicted in a election interference hush money scandal. He spoke at a town hall in Phoenix organized by the conservative youth group Turning Point, where he repeated his critiques of the case against him as politically motivated.
We have to change the system. We have to straighten out what's going on in these sports. We got a rigged deal going this whole country.
He also said he would call in the U.S. Army to patrol the U.S.-Mexico border. The ACLU and other groups are suing the city of Milwaukee over new laws they say will limit First Amendment dissent at the Republican National Committee next month. Some 30,000 people are expected to flood the city for the RNC. Tim Muth, a staff attorney with the ACLU, said in a statement Thursday, Milwaukee's been rolling out the red carpet for the RNC and its attendees, spending millions on their security, but does not appear to demonstrate that same commitment to protecting First Amendment rights of people who want to express opposing views on the streets of Milwaukee during the RNC, he said. The coalition says new rules over parade and protest activity violate their First Amendment by unlawfully limiting where they can parade and exercise their rights to free speech. Meanwhile, Chicago police are under fire after videos have surfaced of training in riot gear ahead of the Democratic National Convention in August. The activist group Roots Action said police were training to attack protesters. Israeli airstrikes in the last 24 hours have killed at least 77 Palestinians and wounding 235 others. Among the targets, another United Nations school shelter, killing at least 3. The Wafa news agency, citing medical sources, reports 8 massacres occurred today against 8 families in Gaza, bringing the death toll surpassing 36,700. In the U.S., the NAACP is joining calls on the Biden administration to end its weapons shipments to Israel over its war in Gaza. The nation's oldest and largest civil rights group said President Biden's 3-stage proposal for a ceasefire does not go far enough. President and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, said in a statement, "It's one thing to call for a ceasefire, it's another to take the measures necessary to work towards liberation for all." The group also urged an end of artillery shipments to states that supply weapons to Hamas. Activists are planning to protest the war in Gaza with a "Where's the Red Line" action to surround the White House, dressed in red, Saturday, referencing President Joe Biden's comments an Israeli ground offensive in Rafah would be a red line, which has already come to pass. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for Pacifica Radio.